On the night of April 7th, 1972, Joey Gallo walked into Umberto's Clam House in Little Italy to celebrate his 43rd birthday with his wife, stepdaughter, sister. It was 5:30 in the morning, and Joey was in good spirits, enjoying clams and skungili. Then the door burst open. A gunman rushed in and opened fire. Joey was hit multiple times. He stumbled toward the door, leaving a trail of blood, and collapsed on the street. The shooting happened so fast that witnesses barely saw what occurred. But when it was over, Crazy Joe Gallo was dead, murdered in one of the most famous mob hits in New York history. This is the story of Joey Gallo, a gangster who read Sartre, befriended celebrities, challenged the Mafia establishment, and paid for his ambitions with his life. Joseph Gallo was born on April 7, 1929, in the Red Hook section of Brooklyn, New York. Red Hook in the 1930s was a tough, working-class Italian-American neighborhood controlled by organized crime. Joey's father, Albert Gallo Sr., worked on the docks, and the family struggled financially. Joey grew up surrounded by poverty, violence, and the constant presence of the Mafia. The neighborhood's social clubs weren't just gathering places, they were headquarters for criminal operations. For ambitious young men with no education, the Mafia offered the only path to wealth and respect. Joey was one of 3 brothers who would all enter the criminal life. Larry, the oldest and most level-headed. Joey, the middle child and most volatile. And Albert Kid Blast, the youngest and most violent. Together, they would form one of the most feared crews in Brooklyn, challenging the established Mafia order and triggering one of the bloodiest internal wars in organized crime history. From his teenage years, Joey was different from other street kids. He was intelligent, curious, and restless. While other young gangsters focused solely on making money and earning respect, Joey read books, questioned authority, and developed interests beyond the narrow world of Brooklyn crime. He was fascinated by philosophy, particularly existentialism. He read Camus and Sartre. He wrote poetry. He saw himself not just as a criminal, but as an intellectual rebel against an unjust system. This self-image would define his entire life and contribute to his downfall. In the late 1940s and early 1950s, the Gallo brothers began working for the Profaci crime family, one of New York's 5 Mafia families. The Profashis controlled rackets throughout Brooklyn, including gambling, loan sharking, and extortion. The brothers proved themselves capable and ruthless. Joey, despite being intelligent and thoughtful in some ways, was also capable of extreme violence. His unpredictability earned him the nickname, Crazy Joe. You never knew what he would do, and that made him dangerous. Joey's reputation for violence was well earned. In 1950, at just 21 years old, he was arrested for assault. Throughout the 1950s, he was involved in numerous violent incidents, though he managed to avoid serious prison time. The Gallo brothers built a crew of loyal soldiers who carried out enforcement work for the Profaci family. They were making money, earning respect, and rising through the ranks. But Joey was never satisfied with being just another soldier in someone else's army. The Profaci family was led by Joe Profaci, an old-school Mafia boss who demanded absolute loyalty and took a large percentage of his soldiers' earnings. Many family members resented Profaci's greed. He lived like a king while his soldiers struggled. He controlled olive oil importation and other legitimate businesses that made him wealthy, but he was stingy with the rank-and-file members who did the dangerous work. This resentment simmered for years, and Joey Gallo was one of those most frustrated with the arrangement. In 1960, Joey and his brothers made a decision that would change Mafia history. They decided to rebel against Joe Profaci. This wasn't just complaining or asking for a better deal. This was open warfare against the boss. The Gallos kidnapped several of Profaci's top lieutenants, including underboss Joseph Magliocco, and held them hostage. Their demands were simple. Profasci needed to share more of the family's wealth with the soldiers and treat them with more respect. If Profasci refused, the hostages would die. This kidnapping shocked the Mafia world. Soldiers didn't kidnap their own boss's lieutenants. This violated every rule of Cosa Nostra. The commission, the ruling body of the American Mafia, was appalled. But Joey didn't care about their rules. He saw himself as a revolutionary, challenging an unjust system. He believed other soldiers would rally to his cause, that he was leading a rebellion for fairness and equality within the Mafia. He was wrong. Profasci negotiated the release of the hostages, promising to meet the Gallo's demands. But he had no intention of keeping his promises. As soon as the hostages were free, Profasci declared war on the Gallo brothers. What followed became known as the First Colombo War, named after Joe Colombo, who would later become boss. The war would last for years and claim numerous lives on both sides. The Gallo faction was outnumbered. Most of the Profasci family remained loyal to the boss, including soldiers like Carmine Persico, who would become Joey's nemesis. The Gallos had their crew and some supporters, but they were fighting against the bulk of the family, plus the disapproval of the entire Mafia establishment. The commission didn't officially support Profasci's war, but they certainly didn't support the rebellious Gallos either. The violence was brutal and constant. Drive-by shootings, ambushes, and assassination attempts became routine. In August 1961, Carmine Persico and other Profasci loyalists attempted to murder Larry Gallo by strangling him with a rope in a Brooklyn bar. Only the random arrival of a police officer saved Larry's life. This incident became legendary. The attempted hit was so brazen and nearly successful that it demonstrated how deadly the war had become. Joey fought back viciously. His crew carried out hits against Profasci soldiers. They bombed businesses. They terrorized anyone associated with the enemy faction. But the Gallos were slowly losing. They were running out of money, supporters were being killed or arrested, and the constant violence was taking its toll. By 1962, Joey Gallo was arrested on extortion charges and sentenced to prison. With their leader incarcerated, the Gallo faction's rebellion essentially ended. Joey spent the next 9 years in prison, from 1962 to 1971. But prison didn't break him. In many ways, it transformed him. Joey used his time to read extensively. He studied philosophy, literature, and politics. He became friendly with African American inmates, which was unusual for an Italian mobster in that era. The Mafia was notoriously racist, but Joey befriended black criminals and even recruited some to work for him upon release. This decision would later prove significant. During Joey's imprisonment, the Mafia landscape changed dramatically. Joe Profasci died of natural causes in 1962. His successor, Joe Magliocco, lasted only a year before being forced out. In 1963, the commission installed Joe Colombo as the new boss of what was now called the Colombo family. Colombo was young, charismatic, and forward-thinking, but he was also tied to the faction that had fought against the Gallos. The feud wasn't over, it was just on pause. Joey also reinvented his public image in prison. He gave interviews to journalists, positioning himself as an intellectual gangster, a philosopher criminal, who was more victim than villain. He charmed reporters with his intelligence and his critiques of the Mafia establishment. The media ate it up. Articles portrayed Joey as Crazy Joe, the colorful, dangerous, but strangely sympathetic mobster who read Sartre and questioned authority. This media attention made Joey famous beyond the Brooklyn underworld. When Joey was released from prison in 1971, he was 42 years old and had been away for 9 years. The world had changed. The Mafia was under increased pressure from law enforcement. Many of his old crew members were dead, in prison, or had moved on. But Joey was determined to reclaim his position and rebuild his power. He believed he could do things differently this time, that he could succeed where he had failed before. Joey's plan involved several bold moves. First, he aligned himself with African American criminals in Brooklyn, bringing them into operations that the Italian Mafia traditionally controlled. This was revolutionary and controversial. The Mafia bosses were furious. They saw this as a violation of tradition and a threat to their control. But Joey didn't care. He believed he could build a multiracial criminal organization that would be more powerful and more difficult for law enforcement to infiltrate. Second, Joey cultivated celebrity friends. He became friendly with actors, writers, and artists in Greenwich Village and Manhattan. He hung out at the Copacabana and other nightclubs. He was friends with Jerry Orbach, the actor who would later star in Law and Order. His life became a mix of Brooklyn gangster and Manhattan intellectual. He loved this duality, the tough guy who could discuss philosophy and the poet who could order a murder. This public profile made him famous, but also made him a target. Third, and most dangerously, Joey believed he could take over the Colombo family. With Joe Colombo shot and incapacitated in June 1971, there was a power vacuum. Various factions competed for control, and Joey thought he could exploit the chaos. He began making moves to assert himself, reaching out to old allies, recruiting new soldiers, and generally behaving as if he was already in charge. This was incredibly risky. The Colombo family leadership saw Joey as an enemy and a threat. By acting like a boss without the commission's approval, Joey was signing his own death warrant. On June 28, 1971, Joe Colombo was shot 3 times in the head at an Italian-American Unity Day rally in Columbus Circle. Colombo survived but was left permanently brain dead, essentially a vegetable, until his death in 1978. The shooter, Jerome Johnson, a black man, was immediately killed by Colombo's bodyguards. To this day, who ordered the Colombo hit remains debated. Many suspected Joey Gallo because of his connections to black criminals. The logic was that Joey had recruited Johnson to kill Colombo, clearing the way for Joey to take over the family. Whether Joey actually ordered the Colombo hit is unknown. He always denied it, and there's no conclusive evidence linking him to the shooting. But it didn't matter. Perception was reality in the Mafia. The Colombo family leadership believed Joey was responsible, and that belief sealed his fate. After Colombo was shot, tensions escalated. The Second Colombo War was brewing, and Joey Gallo was the primary target. Joey seemed aware of the danger, but unwilling to hide. He continued living openly, frequenting restaurants and nightclubs, surrounded by friends and bodyguards, but never truly safe. Some friends warned him to leave New York, to go into hiding until things cooled down. But Joey refused. He believed running would make him look weak. He thought his celebrity status and public profile offered some protection. Surely they wouldn't kill someone so famous, someone who gave interviews to newspapers and partied with actors. On April 6, 1972, Joey celebrated his 43rd birthday. He spent the evening with his wife Sina, his stepdaughter Lisa, his sister Carmela, and his bodyguard, Pete the Greek, Diapoulos. They went to the theater to see Don't Drink the Water, then to the Copacabana nightclub. Around 4 a.m., they decided to get something to eat and drove to Little Italy, to Umberto's Clam House, a restaurant on Mulberry Street. Umberto's was neutral territory, not controlled by any particular Mafia family. Joey felt safe there. They sat down, ordered clams, scungili, and wine. It was after 5 a.m. now, and the restaurant was nearly empty. Joey was relaxed, enjoying his birthday celebration with family. His bodyguard sat facing the door, as bodyguards do. Everything seemed fine. Joey had survived prison, mob wars, and assassination attempts. He'd made it to 43. He was planning his comeback. Then, around 5:30 a.m., a man burst through the front door. Some accounts say there were multiple shooters. Others say it was one man who acted quickly. The gunman opened fire immediately, targeting Joey. Bullets struck Joey in the back, buttock, and arm. Pete the Greek tried to return fire, but was also hit. Joey, wounded and bleeding, stumbled from his seat and tried to reach the door. He made it outside and collapsed on Hester Street, leaving a trail of blood from inside the restaurant to the sidewalk. The shooting was over in seconds. The gunman fled out the back door, through the kitchen, disappearing into the early morning darkness of Little Italy. By the time police arrived, Joey Gallo was lying on the street, barely alive. He was rushed to Beekman Downtown Hospital, but was pronounced dead at 5:50 a.m. on April 7, 1972, his 43rd birthday. Crazy Joe Gallo, the gangster who wanted to be a philosopher, the rebel who challenged the Mafia establishment, was dead. The investigation into Joey's murder went nowhere. Witnesses claimed they saw nothing. The restaurant's owner and staff said they were in the back and didn't witness the shooting. Pete the Greek, Joey's bodyguard who had been shot alongside him, refused to cooperate with police. Following the Code of Omerta, he provided no information about the shooters. The case remains officially unsolved, though everyone in the Mafia world knows who ordered the hit and likely who carried it out. The prevailing theory is that Carmine Persico, Joey's old enemy from the First Colombo War, ordered the assassination. Persico was now a powerful captain in the Colombo family, and he had never forgiven Joey for the rebellion of the 1960s. Whether Persico pulled the trigger himself or simply ordered it remains debated. Some accounts suggest Joseph Joe Yelly, and possibly Carmen's brother, Alphonse Persico, were among the shooters. But without witnesses willing to testify, the truth died with Joey on that street. Joey's funeral was a spectacle. Hundreds of people attended, including celebrities, journalists, and of course, mobsters from various families. The media coverage was extensive. Joey's celebrity status ensured that his death made national news. The New York Times ran a lengthy obituary. His life and death became symbolic of the changing Mafia, the old rules breaking down, the violence spiraling out of control. But who was Joey Gallo, really? The media portrayed him as Crazy Joe, the colorful, unpredictable gangster. His friends remembered him as intelligent, funny, and loyal. His enemies saw him as a dangerous troublemaker who violated Mafia traditions. The truth contained all of these elements. Joey was a complicated man who contained contradictions, intellectual and violent, charming and ruthless, progressive in some ways and criminal in others. Joey's rebellion against Joe Profaci in 1960 was genuinely revolutionary within the Mafia context. Soldiers didn't challenge bosses openly. They didn't kidnap family leadership. They didn't demand equality and fairness. Joey's actions violated every rule of Cosa Nostra, but they also highlighted real grievances within the Profaci family. He was right that Profaci was greedy and unfair. But being right didn't matter in the Mafia. What mattered was power and the willingness to enforce the rules through violence. His friendship with African-American criminals was ahead of its time within the Mafia. The Italian-American mob was deeply racist, viewing black criminals as inferior and refusing to work with them. Joey saw talent and opportunity. He believed a multiracial criminal organization would be stronger and more adaptable. In this, he was proven right. Future decades would see increasing cooperation between different ethnic criminal groups. But in 1971, Joey's openness to working with black gangsters was seen as a betrayal of Italian Mafia traditions. Joey's celebrity friendships and media profile were both asset and liability. On one hand, they gave him status and a platform to shape his image. Journalists loved interviewing him because he was articulate, charismatic, and willing to talk about the Mafia in ways other mobsters wouldn't. But this publicity also made him a target. The old bosses believed in staying invisible, operating in shadows. Joey's face in newspapers and his presence at celebrity parties violated their philosophy of secrecy. The question of whether Joey ordered the hit on Joe Colombo remains one of the great mysteries of Mafia history. Circumstantially, the evidence is suggestive. Joey had motive, eliminating a rival and creating opportunity to take over the family. Means, connections to black criminals who could recruit a shooter, and he benefited from Colombo's incapacitation. But there's no concrete proof. Joey denied involvement until his death. Jerome Johnson, the shooter, was immediately killed and couldn't provide testimony. And the Colombo family had many enemies. Joey wasn't the only person who might have wanted Colombo dead. What's certain is that after Colombo was shot, Joey became the primary suspect in the minds of Colombo family leadership. Whether he actually did it became irrelevant. In the Mafia, perception often matters more than truth. If the family believed Joey ordered the hit, they would respond accordingly. Joey must have known this, yet he stayed in New York, continued his public life, and seemed almost fatalistic about his fate. Some who knew Joey said he had a death wish. He'd survived the Colombo War, prison, and numerous close calls. Perhaps he felt he was living on borrowed time. Perhaps the intellectual in him had romanticized the idea of dying young, going out in a blaze of glory like the existentialist heroes he read about. Or perhaps he simply couldn't imagine living any other way, hiding, running, being less than what he believed himself to be. So he stayed, and he died. Joey's death marked the end of an era. He was one of the last true rebels within the Mafia. Someone willing to challenge the established order, despite knowing it could cost him everything. After Joey, the Mafia became more corporate, more about business, and less about individual personality. The colorful characters were dying off or going to prison. The code was being enforced more strictly. The era of the swaggering, charismatic gangster who lived large and died young was fading. The impact Joey had on popular culture is significant. His life inspired numerous books, films, and even a Bob Dylan song. The 1971 film, The Gang That Couldn't Shoot Straight, based on Jimmy Breslin's novel, was loosely inspired by Joey and the Gallo brothers. The character of Crazy Joe became an archetype, the intelligent, unstable gangster who's too smart for his own good. Later films like Crazy Joe, 1974, starring Peter Boyle, directly depicted his life and death. Joey's widow, Sina Gallo, inherited his legend, but also his debts and enemies. She cooperated with journalists and authors, helping to build the mythology around Joey. In interviews, she portrayed him as a romantic figure, a misunderstood intellectual trapped in a violent world. This narrative, Joey is tragic hero rather than criminal, became dominant in popular culture. It's a testament to Joey's charisma that even after his death, people wanted to believe the best interpretation of his life. The Colombo family continued after Joey's death, though it would be plagued by internal violence for decades. Carmen Persico eventually became boss and ruled from prison for over 30 years. The Third Colombo War in the 1990s would claim even more lives. The family that Joey tried to conquer became one of the most violent and unstable in Mafia history. Whether Joey's rebellion contributed to this instability or merely reflected existing problems is debatable. Larry Gallo, Joey's older brother, survived the mob wars and Joey's death. He tried to maintain the Gallo crew, but without Joey's charisma and celebrity, the faction faded. Larry died of cancer in 1968, before Joey was released from prison. Albert "Kid Blast" Gallo, the youngest brother, survived into the 2000s, but never achieved the fame or power his brother Joey had. The Gallo name, which had once struck fear throughout Brooklyn, became a footnote in Mafia history. The location of Joey's death, Umberto's clam house, became a macabre tourist attraction. People visited Little Italy specifically to see where Crazy Joe Gallo was killed. The restaurant changed owners over the years, and the building eventually housed different businesses, but the legend remained. Tour guides pointed out the spot where Joey collapsed. True crime enthusiasts made pilgrimages. Joey's death became part of New York City folklore. Joey's grave in Greenwood Cemetery in Brooklyn became a similar site of interest. Unlike many mobsters who are buried quietly with small ceremonies, Joey's resting place became well known. Visitors left flowers, coins, and notes. Some came out of genuine respect, others out of morbid curiosity. But they came, testament to Joey's enduring fame decades after his death. The philosophical question Joey's life raises is whether intelligence and education can coexist with criminal life. Joey read Sartre and Camus, understood existentialist philosophy, could discuss literature and art with intellectuals. Yet he was also a violent criminal who participated in murders, extortions, and other crimes. Can someone who understands ethics and philosophy justify participating in organized crime? Joey apparently thought so. He saw himself as a rebel against unjust systems, conveniently ignoring that his own actions caused harm and suffering. Joey's relationship with the media also raises questions about how we romanticize criminals. Journalists loved Joey because he made good copy, colorful, quotable, willing to provide inside glimpses of the Mafia. But in building up Joey as a romantic figure, the intellectual gangster, they perhaps downplayed the violence and criminality that defined his life. The victims of Gallo crew crimes weren't given the same sympathetic coverage as Joey's philosophizing. The racial dynamics of Joey's story deserve examination. His willingness to work with African American criminals was genuinely progressive within the racist Mafia context. But was this truly about equality and justice, or simply about building power and making money? Joey's defenders say he saw people as individuals, not racial categories. His critics say he was simply opportunistic, using black criminals when it benefited him. The truth probably lies somewhere in between. Joey's marriage to Sina Esseri, shortly before his death, adds another layer to his story. Sina was a young actress, beautiful and cultured, who seemed genuinely in love with Joey, despite knowing what he was. Their whirlwind romance and marriage just weeks before his murder gave his story a tragic, romantic quality. Sina, as the grieving widow, became part of the legend. But what was their relationship really like? How much of Joey's intellectual persona was genuine, and how much was performance for the women and celebrities he wanted to impress? The bodyguard question is significant. Pete the Greek was with Joey that night at Umberto's. He was supposed to protect Joey. He was armed. But the shooting happened so fast that Pete couldn't prevent it, and he was shot himself. Some question whether Pete should have seen it coming, whether he was truly trying to protect Joey, or if he was complicit. There's no evidence of betrayal, but in the paranoid world of the Mafia, questions always linger. Pete survived his wounds and lived into old age, never speaking publicly about that night in detail. The timing of Joey's death on his 43rd birthday adds to the tragedy and legend. He was celebrating the day he was born on the day he died. The symbolism is almost too perfect, too literary. It's the kind of detail that makes Joey's story feel like fiction rather than reality. But it happened, captured in police reports, autopsy records, and news articles. Joey Gallo died on his birthday, murdered at a clam house in Little Italy, ending a life that had been equal parts ambition, intelligence, violence, and self-destruction. In the hierarchy of Mafia legends, Joey Gallo occupies a unique position. He never became boss of a family. He spent significant time in prison. He lost the war he started. By traditional measures of Mafia success, Joey was a failure. But his legend endures, because he represented something different. The gangster as intellectual, the criminal as existentialist, the rebel who challenged power knowing it would cost him everything. This romantic narrative, even if partially manufactured, resonated with people far beyond the Brooklyn streets where Joey lived and died. The photographs of Joey tell a story. Early pictures show a young, handsome, tough guy, cocky and dangerous. Prison photos show him more thoughtful, sometimes holding books. Later pictures, after his release, show him smiling at nightclubs, surrounded by celebrities and beautiful women. The final image crime scene photos of Joey's body on Hester Street show the brutal reality beneath the glamour. These images together capture the arc of his life: ambition, incarceration, brief triumph, violent death. Joey Gallo's life lasted 43 years, but his legend has lasted over 50. Books continue to be written about him. Podcasts dissect his life and death. True crime enthusiasts debate whether he ordered the Colombo hit. Film and television continue to reference him. The character of Joey lives on in popular culture as a symbol of a certain type of gangster, intelligent, unpredictable, doomed. The lessons from Joey's life are complicated. Don't challenge power structures without sufficient force to back it up. Don't mistake intelligence for wisdom. Don't believe your own publicity. Don't think fame will protect you from consequences. Don't violate the rules of organizations that enforce discipline through murder. These are the practical lessons. But there's also something almost admirable, in a perverse way, about Joey's refusal to compromise. He lived exactly as he wanted. Consequences be damned. He read philosophy while running a criminal crew. He befriended black gangsters when it was taboo. He courted celebrities and intellectuals. He died on his terms, or at least on his birthday, in a way that ensured his legend would survive. Joseph Gallo was born on April 7, 1929, in Brooklyn, New York, and died on April 7, 1972, in the same city, exactly 43 years later. He spent 9 years in prison, fought in 2 Colombo wars, challenged the Mafia establishment, cultivated a celebrity image, and was murdered at Umberto's Clam House in one of New York's most famous mob hits. He was never a boss, never achieved his ultimate ambitions, but became one of the most famous gangsters in American history. Crazy Joe wanted to be more than a criminal. He wanted to be a legend. In death, he achieved what eluded him in life.